It's amazing how many people are in favor of legalization here in the United States. Well, look around the world where legalization has been tried. It has not succeeded in any country yet.
Mm,
I was on a show a few years ago. A guy named Patrick Bet David had me on the show. I've been on the show twice, and that came up. And they say that you're never supposed to read the online comments. I
mm,
can't help myself. So after I was on his show, um, people were blasting me about, "Oh, this guy's so old. He's still thinking old ways. Somebody needs to tell him about the new program in Portugal." Well, I didn't know about it, so I looked it up, and they came out with this program that looked fantastic. Hey, instead of arresting drug addicts, we're going to get them into mental health programs and get them clean. So that sounded like a pretty good idea. Well, the problem was they didn't fund it. So all
mm.
these people are saying Portugal is the leading country. They created something that's going to work. Go look at it now. It's a colossal failure. And what it does is when you legalize drugs like Denmark, that area, Sweden, the Scandinavian countries that really tried to legalize drugs initially, what they ended up doing is when it's legal, organized crime sees that and they're thinking, "Hey, here's an easy way to make money." So they go in and strong arm everybody. Either you buy our dope or you pay us a tax on any dope you sell. So it's just
Mm,
bringing in other criminal problems, and these are violent criminals coming in, right?
mm. So you have
So,
cartels building on the back of the legalized drug trade.
we talk about legalizing weed here in the United States, and some of the states have done it. I was on a show last week with one guy's a cop and one guy's a former Delta operator, and it was a YouTube live program, and they're pretty popular. I love them. I mean, they're great guys.
Mm.
They're hilarious, and when you do their show, you get to smoke cigars, so that's for me, I love smoking cigars.
If we ever do an episode in person, I'll remember to I'll bring some cigars for us, some cigars and whiskey. We'll save it for
Uh,
round 2.
well, so the topic of marijuana legalization came up, and they're both in favor of it. And they gave me an opportunity to speak my mind about it, and then they gave me their opinions, and I can see one of their points to a certain degree, but it's do you really think that there's rich people out there that are promoting legalization in the United States that are weed smokers? I don't think so. Why
Yeah.
why would you spend tens of millions of dollars to legalize marijuana in Florida where I live? What are you gonna get out of it? You're gonna run marijuana distribution stores where you're gonna make a buttload of money. It's all about capitalism.
Yeah, the financial incentive outweighs the incentive to smoke weed for sure, especially the people at the top that may not even be weed smokers, like you said. They're in it to create a business, franchise, have their own legal operation. The argument, I don't have an expertise in the legalization of drugs. I'm just an armchair philosopher when it comes to this. But the argument that I've heard is that most people do some kind of drug legally, whether it's marijuana or prescription drugs, or it's some kind of maybe even harder substances. You have a safer market that's tested and regulated somehow to take out the bad stuff that's killing people like fentanyl, and then you use the tax dollars from the sales to fund the legalization program. So essentially you're taking the dividends from taxes and feeding it back in. That's the structure of the argument that I've heard. Whether that would work on a wide scale in a country like the United States with 400 million people, I have zero clue. But that's just how I've heard people talk about it.
If it hasn't worked anywhere else in the world, what is it that we would do differently to make it work?
Yeah, I don't know. We're
I do like that argument
yeah.
because, one of the guys the other night made the argument that if marijuana was sold out of, legalized dispensaries, you wouldn't have to worry about fentanyl being in it. Well, you mentioned, having a cigar and a glass of whiskey. I don't drink alcohol anymore. So, I don't condemn people that do. I still go to the bars with the guys, and
Mhm.
let me tell you what, with cops, when it's your turn to buy, they don't care if you drink or not. It's your turn to
Yeah.
buy, so you're gonna buy the round. But why do we feel the need to make it easier for people to do things that are detrimental to themselves that could potentially lead to driving under the influence, which are gonna be detrimental to others.
True.
Why we've got alcohol already, I know whether you like it or not, why do we need something else?
That's true. I guess the counter argument would be, let's say I'm an adult. This is years down the line. I have a son or daughter, doesn't matter, 21 years old. I know they can go into a liquor store, buy a bottle of whiskey, and as long as they consume it responsibly, which hopefully I've raised them okay to know what that is, I know they're not gonna die from it. They're not gonna take a shot of whiskey and overdose and die. I wouldn't be able to guarantee that to my son or daughter with how the drug landscape is today, where they go to a college party and someone has drugs out or someone's smoking a joint and they wouldn't overdose
Mhm,
from smoking a normal amount of weed, or, m doing harder drugs, whether it's, coke or pills or whatever. Because like, fentanyl has been found in pretty much everything that people do, and so, yeah, I guess the evidence that you could point to is if you model it off of something like the alcohol industry, where it is regulated pretty well to the point where people can drink themselves to death. And yes, DUIs are a huge problem, but they're not going to die from an overdose of contamination.
mhm. Well, so there first of all, there are no legitimate studies, medical or scientific studies that show that marijuana has any medicinal purpose. Now, my Patreon channel, I've got a lady who suffers from chronic pain, and she swears that smoking weed alleviates her pain. You know, it's never been my job to put people in jail for smoking weed. I don't care if it I don't think she should live with chronic pain, so if smoking weed alleviates her pain, I'm fine with it. I don't have a problem with that
Hmm.
whatsoever. Just with the knowledge, there's nothing to support that that has, so it's not physiological, it's psychological.
Yeah.
But there's also legitimate studies that say a human brain doesn't develop completely until the mid to late 20s. So if you're a regular marijuana user and you're stymieing, you're degrading the development of your brain, which is you're gonna carry that the rest of your life. There's a study that just came out probably a month ago saying that if you're a regular weed smoker, you're 6 times more likely to develop
Hmm.
respiratory disease. I'm just, my oldest son is a orthopedic surgeon at Children's Hospital of Atlanta. He's a spinal surgeon. I challenge him all the time. Find me a report, that supports marijuana, that supports CBD. Can't find one.
Hmm.
Now, if you go online and you look at these people that, support legalization, they'll tell you, and click on this link to find the latest medical report about the wonderful benefits of CBD or marijuana. And you click on that, you get an advertisement to buy something.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that's a huge problem with people buying pills or drugs on Facebook, where they click on something that could be disguised as an ad or something even totally unrelated, and then they get funneled into a site that's selling these counterfeit
Yeah.
pills, whatever it is, weed, things that you have no idea what's in them, and then that's how these drug traffickers operate, from a lot of them from China, where they're shipping in these fake pills to the US by the
Yeah. Or at least the
millions.
precursors.
Yeah, so, that's also something I wanted to ask you as we start to end off is the war on drugs. It's evolved massively since the '80s and '90s, since the days when Escobar was alive. Overdose deaths in the US, I was looking, they've increased 10 times since Escobar. I think the people were overdosing. It kind of hovered in the '90s between 2,500 people a year and 10,000, but it stayed within that pocket. And then 2023, there were 103,000 overdoses just in the US, 10 times the rate at which people used to overdose. And fentanyl is responsible for 75%
Yeah.
of those overdose deaths just in the US. How do we how do we combat that? Because it's coming, it seems like it's a multi-front war with in terms of the war on drugs with China, Mexico. You also have people that are making it internally in the US, like, 'cause we have to do something to tamper this down? Like, how do we even tackle this fentanyl problem?
Well, first of all, that term you used, the war on drugs, it's probably the biggest misnomer the United States has ever come up with. There's no war. I'm not taking away from the brave men and women that are out there fighting, whether you're law enforcement or military or support groups, but it's a joke. I mean, we're going after the world's first narco terrorist, a guy who's responsible for as much as 80% of the world's cocaine, and we send 2 guys. It's a joke, right?
Yeah.
So, um, we get asked this question a lot, especially, we're in front of an audience, a live audience. Javier and I are proposing. I wish I had I don't have a catch-all answer. I don't have the answer, but I have a suggestion. What if we spent more money on educating children at the youngest age about the dangers of illegal narcotics, to include weed, because it's still illegal and, federally, it's illegal, still illegal. A lot of states, it's still illegal. I You know what, with the current administration, I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of these states that legalized it, you know, recategorize it as illegal.
Mm.
But and I'll give you an example to support that. I have 5 granddaughters. One of them was here at our house. My wife and I live in Orlando. We live on a small lake, and we've got an alligator that comes to visit every once in a while. And so she was here. I think at that time she was probably 5 years old, and so I took her out back and showing. And there's a downhill slope. So the gator, whenever he would see us come out, he'd go out in the water. It wasn't like we had to worry about him attacking us. But you still keep your eyes open, right?
Mm.
So she's like, I'm trying to explain to her the gator and why he looks the way he does, and with the dangers. And at 5 years old, children are so innocent. She's like, Mr. Alligator, if you come up around me, I'll poke you in the eye and I'll bop you on top of the head. Just being a kid. And I said, baby, come here a minute. And I picked her up in my arms and I started telling her, I said, everybody in my family calls me Pops. So I said, Pops will do everything. If that a gator gets a hold of you, I don't think that I can save you, but I will do everything I can to save you. By the time I finished talking to her, like I said, she was in my arms and she's like, Pops, can we go inside now? Can we go inside? So I scared the crap out of this 5-year-old kid. I'm not proud of
Yeah.
it, but does she know the danger of an alligator now? She knows to stay the hell away from him, doesn't she?
Mm.
So what if we did that with our children at a young age? We used to have the DARE program. I think the DARE program is back. There was one administration that came in that reduced the funding or did away with the funding, but it finally came back. And, we get a lot of people say, "Oh, I remember DARE. I remember, about the dangers of all this." And then every once in a while you get a smart aleck that'll come along and say, "Oh yeah, you know what DARE did for me? It taught me which drugs I wanted to try." So,
Mm.
you're not gonna be 100% on what you do. But in our country, it seems like we've become so permissive to that, "Hey, it's my right to do this. It's my right to do that. If it hurts me, well, that's none of your damn business." Well,
Mm.
let me ask you, Zach, do you think if you try cocaine or crack or meth or even low doses of fentanyl, do you think you could become or heroin, do you think you could become addicted?
Yeah. Yeah, there's that possibility.
We all know that, don't we?
Yeah.
So, and this is Murph's personal opinion that a lot of people get pissed off at me about. I told you earlier, I started working when I was 14 years old. I'm an old man now, and I've been retired from law enforcement since 2013. I probably put in as many hours now as I did back then because I'm a workaholic. This
Mm.
is what I like to do. Excuse me. Why should I be responsible as a law-abiding, tax-paying citizen to have to spend my tax dollars to take care of people who made a conscious decision to become addicted to drugs and they can no longer take care of themselves? That's a cold way to look at things, but that's the way I feel. I took care of myself. I took care of my family. Why shouldn't everybody else do that? Why is it okay for you, not you specifically, but just as a theory here. And it boils down to the simple laws of economics of supply versus demand. If we could get rid of the demand, the supply will go away.
Mm.
But no, we're not going to do that here in the United States and other countries either because it's my right. It's my right.
I would say that if addiction was a conscious choice, and again, I'm playing devil's advocate. I'm not a drug expert by any means, but my response would be if addiction was a conscious choice, then that argument could work. But let's say, I'm in a college dorm room and I'm 19 years old and I've had a few drinks in me and someone pulls out a bag of coke and says, "Do you want to try this?" And I go, "Yeah, sure." And I do cocaine and then maybe I do coke 4 more times in my life. So from 20 to 25, I do coke 4 times, and then after that, I'm like, I'm an adult now, maybe I have a kid, I have a job, like, I'm not gonna mess with that stuff anymore. Most people, that is the story of their drug use statistically, but there is a smaller percentage of people that, for whatever reason, whether it's environmental upbringing or it's their biological makeup, that their biology just locks in to cocaine in a different way or whatever drug it is, pills, meth, alcohol, and cannot they do not have the willpower or discipline, like, that doesn't even enter into the equation because their body's biology is working like a force against them to like, where they can't see past anything except doing that drug again.
Mhm.
And I'm grateful that I've never had that experience. I've never been in a situation where I've found myself thinking about the only thing that matters to me today is just doing whatever I have to do to get
Right.
my hands on that next hit. But there are people that, through no fault of their own, they were just born with a different biological makeup or they had a different upbringing where that drug does something devilish to them or whatever word you wanna use, where their life now becomes, "I need to get to my next dose, and I'm willing to steal from my own family, I'm willing to steal from
Mhm.
strangers, I am willing to let my job go by the wayside, like, whatever I have to do to get this drug, I'll do it until I either die or I get help." So in that, uh, example, that you posed with the conscious decision, I don't know, and I would have to talk to either someone like your son or a neuroscientist that studies addiction to see, like, how conscious it is, what level your brain is working on when you become addicted to something, because based on just my limited knowledge of it, it's not always, or not always, it's not a conscious effort to become addicted. It's kind of just the luck of the draw how your body and mind reacts when you encounter a substance. If 100 people do Xanax, maybe 3 get addicted and ruin their lives, and the other 97 do it a couple more times or they never do it again.
Mhm. But it was a conscious choice to try it.
Sure, sure, the trying is the conscious choice.
So
Absolutely.
and I've taught my children, I'm trying to teach my grandchildren, there are consequences for every decision we make in life, good or bad. I mean, you go to a crappy restaurant, you know the consequence that's gonna be. You're gonna be in the bathroom for a while, right? So I mean, every decision you make has a consequence.
Yeah.
So, should you maybe consider those consequences before you make that decision?
Consider them 100%, and I'm grateful that I had parents that told me stories about their past drug use where, they weren't doing anything crazy. They were smoking weed, but, the stories they painted did not make me wanna do drugs. It's stories about, going crazy with paranoia and, like, wanting to, my dad wanting to check himself into the hospital after smoking weed. Th for better or worse, that made me hesitant of doing drugs when I became an adult, and I still experimented, but I always had in the back of the mind of, like, this is a real choice, and it doesn't always work out well,
Right.
and I feel bad for the kids today that aren't just worried about overdosing on the drugs they're intending to do, but they're overdosing on something that they had no intention to put in their bodies, and that is a real risk, and that is
Right.
something that, yeah, I couldn't even say where to begin because I just don't have the experience or the knowledge.
Well, it has taken years to get the attention of Congress about this fentanyl issue. Because when you're talking about, there was 100 and over 100,000 overdose deaths, that equates to over 300 Americans dying every day in our country from overdose. What would happen here's an equivalent of that. What would happen in our country? What would the response be if a commercial jetliner with 300 people on it crashed every single day in our country? We'd be
Oh,
going berserk, wouldn't we?
the airline would be bankrupt within a week.
Yeah, and the uproar would be just unfathomable. But yet here
Mm,
we've got this drug thing going on with the overdose deaths, and we're just not getting
yeah,
the response. Congress just doesn't
yeah.
wanna seem to take it serious. And I wanna throw one other thing out there about the marijuana legalization. The Mexican cartels are making so much money off of marijuana, not only grown in Mexico, but grown here in the United States in extremely remote areas, especially Northern California. They're making so much money, you think they're gonna give that up? If we're putting a tax on legal marijuana, and I don't even know what that would translate into in dollars. I don't know. So let's say for an ounce of marijuana, it costs you, what, 1,000 bucks? Just, for
The
round numbers.
yeah.
But they home grow it, and they can sell it for 500. Where's people gonna go?
Mm,
It's not gonna get rid of I love it when people say, "Well, it would stop the violence of the Mexican cartels." Let me tell you, they're not gonna stop. There's a guy named John Norris out there who's a former wildlife officer in California that does a fantastic job presenting this. He's got a great book. He was on their marijuana eradication teams. I think he was one of the founders of it. And if you'd like to meet him, I'd be glad to make an introduction.
yeah, you said John Norris?
Nores.
N-O-R-E-S.
Just does a fantastic job of from personal experience, where, police officers are being shot, canines are being poisoned, the Mexicans are using toxic chemicals that kill wildlife. They would go to these marijuana grows, they'd find dead bear, dead mountain lions, all kinds of critters that had gotten into these toxic chemicals, which are outlawed in our country, but they don't give us crap.
Mm,
So it's anybody that thinks the violence and the Mexican cartel involvement in just specifically weed, but anything else for that matter, is gonna stop because we legalize it, that's you're in
yeah.
for a rude awakening.